Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. This is Simon Götzen. You're watching Simon Says at MTGOacademy.com. And today I want to talk about some of the cycles in Return to Ravnica, but not from a design or development perspective, but simply from a limited perspective. And this idea came to me because in Everything Restored I did something where I analyzed the uncommons and talked about the different roles that the cards in each color would play in theory and in practice, and this doesn't really work for Return to Ravnica because of the guild structure, and you would have to talk about the white cards and then the green-white cards and then the green cards, but there's also a lot of overlap. So I thought, what else could I do to resemble that a little bit? And I realized that there's quite a lot of cycles in Return to Ravnica Limited that are very relevant for limited play. And you can already see that I picked out the charms, the Keyrunes, the guild mages at uncommon, then the off-color activated ability cards and the hybrid commons to discuss. So let's get started with the commons because they are more important for limited, and I'm going to talk about the hybrid cycle first. Now, it was always clear that Sunring Growth was a sideboard card, but I want to start with that card to say that the populate mechanic really showed up in force from the beginning, and I don't think it has slowed down. My most favorite deck is still a heavy populate deck, and playing against a heavy populate deck with cards like Rootborn Defenses and Druid's Deliverance after it has deployed some centaurs is just incredibly difficult. Now, Vessel Sol is the boring card out of these five. Never that great, never amazing. It's worse than Sunspire Griffin, but it does its job. Now, Frostburn Weird was very early on in the format considered one of the best commons you could have, and I totally agree that that's the case for Izzet. It's playable in Azorius and Rakdos, but it does lose some of its punch. So this is clearly the best of these commons, but yeah, Frostburn Weird was never really in doubt. Now, Rakdos Shred Freak looked like it would add to the very aggressive nature of Rakdos decks, and in my personal experience, I don't really like what Rakdos has in the sense of 2 mana 2/2s, because having 3 or even 4 power is so important, and a 2/1, even if it has haste, is dominated very early on in the game. So while I still main deck this sometimes, I'm actually happy not to have it and play other cards instead. Like this one, Golgari Longlegs, for me the clear winner out of these 5. So much better than we all first thought. I don't mind picking this as early as 3rd or 4th pick in green, in black, in Golgari of course, and it's great in defensive and offensive strategies simply because 5/4 for 5 is insane value. You are usually happy if you can play, if you make an Ooze token with 5 mana and it's 4/4, you almost want to jump with joy, and Longlegs is just better than that. Of course it's not a token, but you get the idea. Now, for the other common cycle here, there's a similar theme. We have Stonefire Crocodile and Selesnya Sentry basically just doing what they do, and Stonefire Crocodile doing what it does in Golgari better than Selesnya Sentry does what it does in Selesnya, simply because Stonefire Crocodile's lifelink ability is very relevant with cards like Giant Growth and the Scavenge mechanic, and it's also much more important for the Golgari deck to have this than for the Selesnya deck to have a 6 mana regeneration on one of its weakest creatures. Now, Tower Drake didn't surprise anybody basically. We've seen this before, it's a reprint, and it's a fine card in Azorius. There's also games that go long where the ability really matters, but overall you would still rather have Sunspire Griffin almost every time. Now, the big winners from these 5 are certainly Pursuit of Flight and Deviant Glee, and I can't stress this enough that these cards that look like last picks, quotes on, quotes off, actually make a lot of the decks in the format that much better. So while this was a Rakdos card that has really underperformed, Deviantly is the sleeper card in Rakdos for me. And because Rakdos isn't the most reliant on aggressive strategies, I'm going to put that first. But Pursuit of Flight also certainly delivers. Now, when we turn to the uncommons, we have to say that the power level of all of these cards is pretty high. They were designed to be good in limited and or constructed, and that really shows. But still, there's some things to be said about these cycles. And the first thing is that I feel that Keyrunes are the weakest, followed by Charms, and then Guild Mages really being the top cards of the format. Now, let's make some space here. I want to talk about the Guild Mages first. All of them are good, but I feel like Nivik's Guild Mage is really the worst of them. It has the least impact in the early game, which is, I feel, Return to Ravnica is most important, and its card advantage mechanisms aren't as important in the late game, because you are playing a color combination with blue that's quite favored in the late game, maybe except for playing against a strong populate deck. Now, and that already answers the question which is the best of these. It's easily Vidogazi Guild Mage. This card is takes over games so easily, and it's also, like all of these, a 2-mana 2/2. If you have another way to make a token, you can start populating on turn 4, and that's just brutal. This is everything that Growing Ranks would like to be and more. So, overall, with the remaining 3, I don't really want to give a grading. I think that all of them are really good in their respective guilds. You just have to be aware that Rixmati Guild Mage only works offensively. Korosda Guild Mage is very mana hungry. And Nuprav Guild Mage is similar to Kabuto Moth, for those that remember, in the sense that you don't really activate him all that often, but when you do, it's often crippling. So, for example, you detain just once the whole game, but that's actually enough to win. Or you just activate the target creature against flying 3 times in one turn to attack for lethal. So this is somewhat... It looks weaker than it is. And giving a creature flying when your opponent doesn't have a blocker, it's basically a super powered Rogue's Passage. Another sleeper card of this format. Now, the Charms are not really all meant to be good in limited, so Rakdos Charm just doesn't really deliver. You could play it in a very aggressive deck, but it's just not that great. And similar things hold for Izzet Charm and Golgari Charm. Izzet Charm does deal 2 and prevents you from flooding and can counter some kind of combo trick, so it still does something useful. For Golgari Charm, it's far more difficult to get these situational effects to align. However, I've heard people have very good experiences with Golgari Charm, and I've also had a very nice attack once where I attacked with a Golgari Longlegs, and when my opponent double blocks the Longlegs, I could, it was with a Towering Indrik and some other 2/2. Now, if I just regenerate my creatures, then I kill his Longlegs and everything is fine. But the way Golgari Charm works against double blocking is you just give all creatures -1/-1, because they block with 2, it shrinks their creatures by twice as much, and then Golgari Longlegs is able to survive against a double block of 4 power and 6 toughness while killing both creatures, which is pretty funny. Now, Azorius Charm has an effect I don't really like. The part to put an attacking or blocking creature on top of its owner's library is a tempo play, but it's virtually increasing the quality of your opponent's draws, and you always have to be aware that these effects have this kind of effect on the gameplay. You're trading a card, and the next draw step, which could have been a land, is definitely going to be the opponent's best creature. Sometimes it's a complete blowout, but overall, don't overestimate this card. I don't think it's the second best, in fact. I think it's probably more along the line of this, and personally, I would even like to have a Golgari Charm rather than Azorius Charm. Selesnya Charm, I feel, is the best of the charms, simply because of its exiling a creature with power 5 or greater, which is something that the green-white decks can't do all that easily. It only costs 2 and is an instant, which means that all the other strategies bound on pumping creatures, putting Knight of Valor on creatures, giant growthing creatures, just get hard countered by Selesnya Charm. And add to that the fact that you can also get a very efficient combo trick or a Knight token to populate, makes this card truly insane. Now, last but not least, let's look at the Keyrunes, and overall my verdict is that these Keyrunes are actually pretty bad in limited. So they look like they offer a lot of value because you get mana and a creature, but it's often very expensive to activate it, and you run into your opponent's effects when you try to use them on defense. And then look at a card like Izzet Keyrune. You get a 2/1 that's worse than a Sealer of Secret when it's connects. So this is easily my least favorite of the 5. And then Azorius Keyrune and Golgari Keyrune, it's only 2/2s. So the Azorius Keyrune is a Vessel Soul when animated. Golgari Keyrune is basically a Sluice Ray Scorpion when animated, but you don't get any way of scavenging. And I feel like that's just not good enough in this format. Paying so much mana and skipping your turn 3 if you want to have this effect early is just not worth it. But waiting until turn 5 to drop this and animate it means you're paying 5 for a 2/2 when you could just drop Longlegs instead. Now, Rakdos Keyrune and Selesnya Keyrune are a bit better because a 3/3 and a 3/1 with First Strike actually make a huge difference on a board. And these decks are also the ones that might be able to play these on curve by following it up with a small creature or a pump spell. So this makes them both better as cards themselves and also within their colors. I like Rakdos Keyrune the best. It's a little fragile, but there aren't that many ways to deal with 1 toughness creatures easily. And First Strike is really, really relevant. Also combining nicely with your burn spells and other First Strike creatures, and being almost impossible to block when used offensively. Okay, that's it. I hope you like this little discussion of the cycles of Return to Ravnica in Limited. Enjoy the draft, let me know what you think in the comments, and see you next time.